and Faye just reminded me, you've probably seen him in the New York Times, the LA Times, the San Diego Union Tribune, People Magazine, everybody
Everywhere.
is writing about him and ranting about him.
Looks like him.
And he's going to be one of those authors
It's
that
amazing how they can do that.
at the next event you're going to see hundreds of people, so be lucky that you're here tonight.
Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind, I take a picture for my daughters and my Facebook page of they're old enough now that they, previous tours, it's been so long since my last book. In previous tours, they were too young to know or care. But now they're, I'm away for 3 weeks from home. I don't go back home until, I've been on the road for now a week and a half. And I have another week and a half. So I'm just going to take a picture here. And if you don't want to be, recognized, just cover your face. I understand about that all. This isn't salacious at all. So. Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have a fan page?
Yeah, I actually do have my publisher. It's a Facebook fan page, and it's just Chang-Rae. So I find it a very cheap way to put up photos on the and then my daughters can look at it. So. What I normally do is I'll read a little bit from the book, but what I'll do is I'll just read just a page or two, just to give you a sense of what I think the book sounds like. I mean, obviously, there's a whole big story here, and it's a story that involves 3 primary characters and a couple different locales, a number of locales, primarily in Korea during this period of 1950 to 1954, but also involves another scene with a character in Manchuria in 1934, in New Jersey and Italy in 1986. So the story really moves across time, and one of the reasons it does that, well, I don't know what the reasons it does that. It does that because I didn't want to focus just on a war story. This is not just a war story for me. There are many scenes of action, of battle, but I don't think anyone needs to write a war novel anymore in some ways. I mean, I think we all know too much about war, but I did feel as if I wanted to have the reader engage and experience some of the more violent things that happen in a very visceral and emotional way, so that you could understand what the book is really about, which is about enduring such trauma, about life after the fires and the crucible of that kind of difficulty. So that's, I mean, the book involves a lot of things, but I think ultimately it's about looking at and thinking about what a life is like after that. That's what is, that's what was always fascinating to me as I conceived the book. So there are a lot of difficult moments in this book. I won't try to. If you've read the reviews, you probably get a sense that there are a lot of difficult scenes, but those scenes are, I hope, a means to something rather than just as some kind of sensational, and they're certainly not meant that way. The beginning of the book involves one of the characters. There are 3 characters: June, who is a Korean woman. She was a young girl during the war. Hector Brennan, who's a soldier during the war, and the woman that they both meet at the orphanage where June ends up in 1953. And that woman is named Sylvie Tanner. But in this section, it's just right at the beginning of the book. June is with her siblings on a train going to, heading southward, away from hostilities. It's a refugee train. And the train is full of people inside. They're just boxcars. And June and her siblings are actually having to ride on top because there's just no room inside. And apparently this was normal. So if you can imagine that train rolling through a darkened valley, just lined with people on top. And that story comes from, that scene came from a little story my father told me many years ago. But I'll read the story first, and I'll just mention something afterwards, and then I hope you'll have lots of questions about whatever. You know, it doesn't have to be about this book. Obviously, it just came out, so but anything you like. Okay. Okay, so this is Korea 1950, and again, story is important, character is important to all writers, but to me particularly, language is important too. And that's why I like to read a little bit, so you can get a sense of what I think it sounds like. The journey was nearly over. The night was unusually chilly, the wind sharpened by the speed of the train as it rolled southward through the darkened valley. The cotton blanket June had stolen was large enough to spread as a tarp, and at the same time wrap around her younger brother and sister and herself. But it was threadbare, and for brief stretches the train would accelerate and the wind would cut right through to them. It had not been a problem the night before, but now they were riding on top of the boxcar, as there was no more room within any of them, even as the train was more than a dozen cars long. A massive phalanx of refugees had met the train at the last station, and in the time it took her siblings to relieve themselves by the side of the tracks, they had lost their place and had had to climb the rusted ladder between the cars. June running alongside for 50 meters until her brother was high enough on the rungs so she herself could jump up and on. There was a score or so of people atop every car, groupings of families and neighbors, mostly women and the old and the young, and then a cluster or two like theirs, children traveling by themselves. June was 11. Hee-soo and Ji-young had just turned 7. They were fraternal twins, though looked as much alike as sister and brother could, only the cut of their hair distinguishing them. June knew they could have waited in the hope of another train with room inside, but it hadn't been cold when they'd stopped just before dusk, and she decided they ought to keep moving while they had the chance. To keep moving was always safer than lingering in one place, and there was nothing back at the depot to eat anyway. There were a few scruffy soldiers drinking and playing cards by the depot shack, though their presence could only mean trouble, even for a girl her age. She was tall besides, and she was wary of soldiers and any stray men. They were some 200 kilometers south of Seoul, past Cheongju, and June was now thinking they could make their way down to Busan, where her uncle's family lived, though she didn't know whether they were still there or even alive. The train sped up on a slight decline, and June curled her arm around her siblings, spooning them tightly. They lay as low as they could between the ridges of the steel roof of the boxcar. They were on the front end of the car, and as such they were fully buffeted by the rushing wind. They were fortunate to have a blanket. Many others on top of the cars did not. It was too early to sleep, but it was cold, and it was better for the twins not to be active, especially given that the two had shared only a few crackers early in the day. June herself had eaten nothing. They had eaten well the day before, as June had found, below a footbridge, a GI's abandoned pack of canned rations, a small bar of chocolate, and a sleeve of crackers. Her brother and sister were so hungry that they bolted down the chocolate first, as June was smashing the cans open against a rock. She'd cut her finger and gotten some blood on the food, but they ate it without hesitation. 2 tins of stewed beef and 1 of sardines and tomato sauce. Afterward, each taking a turn to lick the insides, carefully, with the deftness of cats. She'd made them save the crackers. They'd been by themselves on the road since their mother and older sister were killed 2 weeks before, at first traveling with some people from their town, but then blending in with the endless stream of other refugees moving southward along the pushed-up roads and embankments of the river valleys. At another time, it might have been a pretty journey, the hills just turning the colors of pumpkin and hay and pomegranate, and the skies depthless and clear. But now everywhere one looked, most of the trees had been felled for fuel, and there was only a hazy, oppressive brightness refracted from the shorn hillsides. There were formerly cultivated fields of potatoes and cabbages, and then the terraces of rice paddies, but all had been stripped and then abandoned during these first months of the war.